Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very exciting episode of Ask an Expert. Kinsey and I are thrilled to be joined by not one, but two incredible guests. We have Dr. Shelley Onderdonk and Adam Snow here, who you'll learn have incredible backgrounds as equestrians, kind of in ways that overlap and are very different. So we are really excited to dive into a number of things with this amazing duo. One thing we are certainly going to cover is how to warm your horse up and how to really do right by your horse as we pursue these competitive things that many of us do, or even just as we pursue the training that we're pursuing. But to start, Shelley and Adam, thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so excited for this conversation. So to start, it would be great to get to know both of you. So you two are a married couple, and maybe if we start with you, Shelley, will you tell us where you guys are, talk a little bit about your path to the veterinary practice that you have today. And then Adam, we can learn more about kind of your background. There's so much to dive into. You guys have written a book together and you have a book coming out. So let's cover all the bases to start. But Shelley, if you could kind of give us that initial introduction about where you are and your path to the veterinary practice that you have today, that would be great.
Okay. We live in Aiken, South Carolina, and we are currently in our home on our horse farm. We originally moved to Aiken in 1992 to make it our home base. And we love it as a place where our horses are really happy. And as far as my personal story, I was a horse crazy little girl who played with my prior horses and begged and borrowed and stealed, but for whatever riding lessons and trips I could go on to ride a horse. And I decided to become a veterinarian, or I thought I probably wanted to be a veterinarian pretty early in my life. And I went to University of Georgia, graduated in 1997. And pretty soon after that, I realized I really wanted to study veterinary acupuncture. And so I became certified through IVAS, the International Veterinary Acupuncture Society, and have had my own private practice focusing on integrative medicine and in sport horses mostly since then. And my husband, Adam Snow, is sitting next to me.
Yeah, so unlike Shelley, I kind of came to the horses through sports. So initially I was a sports crazy little boy. I grew up in Hamilton, Massachusetts, and I played ice hockey and lacrosse and baseball and tennis. And then my dad and my uncle and my cousin played polo, and my grandfather at Myopia in Hamilton, Massachusetts. And so that was one more sport that I loved, and I would play every summer along with my brother on the few horses that my dad and my granddad had. So out of college, I was already pretty good from playing every summer and thought, well, I want to see if I can play one winter professionally in Florida. So I went to Argentina to train and worked on a polo ranch breeding operation, and did get to play a winter professionally in Florida. And that was in 1988. And that turned into like 34 years of playing professionally. And it was really the transition of playing other people's horses to playing our own horses. And Shelley was in vet school at this time that my focus started to shift from the competitive venue to the equestrian one, and what we could do to improve our skills, my skills, as it related to the horses and creating the best partnerships possible. And that's what our book, Winning with Horses, is about.
It's amazing, you guys. They're both of your backgrounds and expertise. It's like I'm going to have to hold back throughout this whole conversation because I just know you've had such incredible experiences and such deep knowledge in these different areas. Out of curiosity, when and where did you guys meet along both of those different paths you just described?
So we met in New Haven, Connecticut when we were in college. And so our farm is actually, we named it New Haven Farm here in Aiken. So I was actually 18 and Adam was 20 or 21,
21.
when we met. He graduated, and then we had a long distance relationship for a few years. And then we got married when I graduated from college, actually.
So
June
that
3rd, 1989.
Yeah. So the horses were definitely something that sparked an interest because I never knew any guy who knew how to ride. So when we were dating, and then I found out that he knew something about horses, and then we went for our first date, like just a dinner, like in town, and then he invited me to go to a polo game, and he thought like, oh, like that's kind of random that she wants to go, and I was like, oh my god, I can't wait to go see the horses.
wow.
And then like, I went and visited him, and I got to ride a horse, and I was like, wow, this is great. And Adam's reaction always has been like, oh my gosh, I have like this girlfriend who knows how to ride. What is going on? So,
wow.
yeah, so it was kind of, I think one of the reasons that we stuck together was the horses. Probably
That's
one of the
incredible.
reasons we're together. If truth be
It's
known.
the glue that keeps us married.
Yeah, the glue and also kind of that initial spark, but it's fascinating that it was so early because you think about both of your careers, and I would have assumed, like Adam, you were already deep into your professional polo career, and so it made sense because Shelley already had an integrated veterinary practice, but it really was like the very earliest. It wasn't even really the like impetus of that first date.
Yeah, and I think we probably both molded our careers somewhat in relation to that. Like, I think that we fed off each other in that way,
It sounds like it. And I'm really interested to hear. I mean, it's such an interesting pairing. And it's not, before we jumped on here, we briefly mentioned Tick and Sinead Maynard, and they have this, competitive competitive pursuits that are also married with like natural horsemanship and integrated medicine. And you two have kind of a similar, just a similar experience and a similar things that you're pursuing. Shelley, will you describe to us what integrative veterinary medicine is and kind of where the differences lie to a traditional vet? I know it is traditional veterinary medicine as well, but kind of just like make that clarification for us.
So the terminology is interesting. It's a good question that you asked, because people used to call it alternative, and then they were calling it complementary, and now the word is integrative. So it has sort of morphed over the decades that I've been practicing it. And I do like the integrative better, because it's not like I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not forgetting everything I learned in vet school or all those years of experience. I am just integrating everything that I've learned in the now, 20 plus years since I graduated, that, the vast majority of my continuing education hours I do are in what we would call traditionally integrated medicine fields, whether it's, manual therapy, rehabilitation, acupuncture, herbal medicine, things like that. And so basically that is where the integrative comes from, is it's integrating traditional veterinary medicine with all these other practices as well. And then where that kind of ends up falling for most people, and for me in particular, is not focusing so much on the things that regular vets focus on, as far as if you're going to diagnose a lameness, you are looking, you're not looking just to like inject a joint. You're going to try to find out why that joint was injured in the first place. And so it's spending maybe a little bit more time. It's looking at it from a different angle, a different perspective. If that answers your question.
It certainly does. And when you take that approach, is the intention for the long-term well-being for the horse, like taking that approach you believe is like in the horse's best interest for the long term or even for the short term?
Absolutely. For me, it's definitely in line with my ethics, so to speak, my personal ethics. It's also just sort of in line with how, my worldview. But it definitely does have something to do with longevity, although I don't feel like that's the only reason, because I do feel like sometimes these therapies can have immediate relief, like especially myofascial work. I mean, you can have a horse that's lame and you do myofascial work for 15 minutes and they're not lame anymore, if that's what their primary problem is. So it's not necessarily just like, oh, we'll just let them hurt for a while, but long term it'll be better. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Totally. Yeah. You just have these other tools in your toolbox. It's very interesting. And Adam, when you think about that approach that Shelley takes to her veterinary practice, how has that shown up in your career as a professional polo player? Is it with the care of the horses from a veterinary perspective, or does it kind of seep over into the training of the horses too? I'm curious whether like natural horsemanship approaches go hand in hand with that sort of veterinary medicine, or just how it exists in your experience.
For me, I think they do go hand in hand. I would say initially I thought of it as sort of a seesaw, and Shelley was like more on the longevity and equine welfare side, and I was more on the next match and this competition and winning side. A little bit the way there's a debate in sports of whether to focus on player development in youth sports or on winning. And gradually during the course of my career, I think that I got more and more natural about my approach and more aligned with Shelley, that ultimately it was winning for the horse that was usually winning for me too. So I mean, she helped me immensely through my career. And many of the decisions she made, she was in her own mind balancing my goals as an athlete and wanting our horses and me to win games and tournaments and win best playing pony prizes, but also wanting them to do that for many, many years and not risk everything for a game that might not be the finals of the US Open. I just trusted her judgment and knew that she was looking at the whole horse, and putting her hands on the horses and knowing how they exercised and what their turnout had been during the off season. So it was kind of the best possible treatment and care and preparation for my horses that they could have.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think this is the perfect time I know you guys wrote a book in the past together called, I don't want to get it wrong, Polo Life.
Life.
Yeah.
And your upcoming book is called Winning with Horses, and that's out. Polo Life. Okay, if anybody is not watching the video because you're listening after
this is not a pitch, but this is the book.
Well, no, the reason that what I was going to say is if you're just listening, you're missing out on the most beautiful background that Shelley and Adam have at their home. They told us they have horses out the window behind them, but there's also like the most beautiful bookcase and images of their horses. So there's a link in the episode description if you're just listening, and you can kind of take a peek at where they are, but it's very beautiful. So the book that's coming out on June 13th is your second book together called Winning with Horses. Okay. Shelley, will you describe what prompted that book, what it's about? Because I'm sure that that's a good setup to the conversation that we're going to continue with for the rest of the Ask an Expert.
Yeah. So basically, we were thinking about writing a second book, which sometimes sounds like a crazy idea after it's a lot of work to write a book. But we really wanted to focus on this issue that a lot of people with our first book were very interested in. And that was how we managed, because Polo Life, our first book, was very much about our horses in the game of polo. I mean, I mean, there were lots of things about training them and about specifics of all sorts of different sports psychology and veterinary work and stuff, but it was all focused around our life in polo, which basically means to do the horses that we've had. And some of our readers were really fascinated by the fact that we could care so much about our horses and still have been so successful. And so we kind of took that as a kernel for our book, Winning with Horses. And we were able to, our first book was self-published. So that was another reason it was a lot of work, because we had to do all the groundwork ourselves as far as selling it. And then, but this book, Trafalgar Square, was our publisher, and they really liked the idea, and they thought they had been fabulous and supportive. And so we hashed out, a proposal, and they gave us their feedback, and we came up with an outline, and how it goes with an editor. It was great. So that's sort of how that process went for our second book. And the questions definitely around this idea that we can have a win-win, that doing what's best for the horse in the long run is really going to be how you compete the best as an equestrian athlete, the human athlete. And we focus on ideas of innovation versus keeping things natural. We focus on like short-term versus long-term thinking. And we also discuss a lot about how to prioritize, because not everybody has, we were certainly like this. You don't have infinite amounts of money and time and resources. And so, and in this crazy world of horses, there's people just hawking everything, and people telling you that there's this and there's that, and how to kind of wade through all that information and figure out what really your horse needs and what you really need to further their welfare.
It's such an important topic, and I'm just so glad that you guys are covering it. And I feel like we could be talking for hours, because just that topic is like, there's so much to cover on that. Before we dive in kind of in more detail into warming up and kind of what makes a great warm up in your guys' eyes and your guys' experience, we got a question in chat, and it's from Debbie, and she's asking, do you think that traditional vets are going to have to be more integrative in the future, or do you think that they will stay traditional and horse owners will have to add alternate providers to their team? Apologies. Tongue twister.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think that veterinary medicine, I mean, even in the years, the decades since I graduated, information has exploded in all areas, and so I think it's hard to be the practitioner who does everything. And I really do think that there's going to be, like, for somebody who is really wants the best for their horse, they're probably going to have a few different people on their healthcare team. That's the short answer.
One thing that you mentioned that you cover in the book is innovation versus keeping things natural. Is that mostly with regards to like the new medicines and treatments that are coming out versus like the more natural approach to medicine that you mentioned, 10 minutes ago? Is that mostly what you're talking about there? And do you fall on, is it one or the other, or is it just like lean natural when possible?
Yeah, so it's not just about medicine. No, it's about everything to do with horses. For example, feed is a huge one, right? I mean, there's so many fads of this is how you need to feed your horse, and and some of those things are sort of contravening what evolution made a horse naturally eat. Putting horses in stalls is you could call it an innovation that we do mostly really for ourselves, for convenience. It keeps them clean, they're accessible so that we can ride them, versus turnout. Those are just two examples of things that are not just medicine that we talk about in our book.
And in addition, like right now, I have 8 horses in work. Shelley has 4 horses in work. All of my horses are barefoot. They live outside for probably 23 hours a day. They come inside and get their feed and exercise. And the other thing is the natural horsemanship that both Shelley and I have come to really value in our own programs and the own development of the partnerships we're developing with the individual horses, either as a warm-up or as an adjunct to their training process. And even things as elemental as planting cover crops during the winter so that the horses have something to graze on, forage on, even when the Bermuda and Bahia is dormant in this part of the country. So there's many elements to the
natural.
To the natural.
Yeah.
That's
And
so
no, I
interesting.
don't always come down that natural is better. I mean, humans have great brains, and there's some innovations which are fabulous across the board. Like one example I use as far as feed is the research that was done to prepare for the Atlanta Olympics. They were really concerned about the horses having heat stress, and they did some really great nutritional research, which showed that feeding high protein diets makes horses actual body temperature increase more with exercise than feeding lower protein. So they developed, in order to get the calories, that was the research that showed that feeding fat to horses was a better way to feed these high performance horses. It needed more calories, but you didn't want to have them be heated up, essentially, because a lot of performance horses are performing in hot, climates. And so that's a good example of an innovation, which has been super helpful for the equine industry.
Yeah, and Adam, you had just mentioned that your horses are all barefoot, which I think is really interesting, and it's something that I think people just don't think that is actually an option. What are you doing for your horses to make that even possible? Like, how is that an option for you?
So, I mean, I'm semi-retired from tournament polo, but I actually tried it during several seasons here in Aiken, where we're blessed with sandy soil. I played 2 or 3 tournaments barefoot. I never really noticed a big slip. I just didn't win any of those tournaments, so I went back to shoes because I'm a little superstitious. But now I'm playing more in exhibitions and pro-ams and fast practices. And so I've learned to do my own trimming, as has Shelley. The Essential Hoof is a great book that I sort of used as our Bible. And then we had
some good trimmers we learned from as well.
Good barefoot trimmer who is very generous with her knowledge. So I feel comfortable, and Shelley gives me tips. Just the other day was up there, okay, work on a little dish on the sides of the foot, and but I feel comfortable with it. So I go through them, every couple of weeks, and just take a little here and a little there with the knife and a rasp, and less is more is my theory, because I'm certainly not an expert, so I don't want to make anybody sore, but they're playing really well, and I feel confident playing them barefoot.
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, I kind of started doing a hard press on it with Adam. I would give him veterinary research articles about like the forces on the hind foot if you have, calks, and how you're prone to pastern fractures and the whole, the ground reaction forces with the slide and all this stuff. So, because I mean, the data is very clear that barefoot is a much healthier way for the foot to maintain soundness long term. And so, the absorption of the frog shock absorption quality of the frog is improved. The shock absorption quality of the lamina is improved, and it stimulates hoof growth in a way that you never can replicate with a shoe on. And so, Yeah, so we have sort of morphed slowly. I mean, we always had our horses barefoot when they'd be turned out, and also often when they were starting in work. And then, to compete, sometimes you have to put shoes on. It's sort of how we've been going the last 5 years or so.
Understood. And what you just mentioned is where my biggest curiosity is around being barefoot versus not. And it's like when you compete, sometimes you need to have shoes on. How do you know whether you do or not? What's your indicator? If your horse is going barefoot, either in light work or when they're on vacation, what's your indicator that it would be a good idea to put shoes on as you either ramp up for competitions or have started your competition season?
For me, I mean, personally, I'm an amateur eventer, and so for me, it's completely about the surface that I'm asking my horse to go on. And so, unfortunately, if you go, I mean, on my farm, I can do everything barefoot, no problem. And the same thing with the polo ponies, because we have grass everywhere, it's sandy soil, it's great footing, but if you're going to ask your horse, for example, to jump into a water jump and they're landing on gravel, I feel like that's an unfair ask if they're barefoot. So like things like that, basically. Like I have a lot of dressage clients here in Aiken whose horses are barefoot because they have good rings at home. They're hacking them on grass, and the surfaces that they're competing them on are usually, GGT or something really good. So that's an easy thing to do.
That's such a clear answer. It's like you have to put yourself in your horse's shoes.
Absolutely.
Yes, and Adam's gonna talk a little bit
I
about
had to say that
because it's something that we talk about in our book. It's this word called umwelt.
We came across an article talking about the word umwelt, which is referring to the sensory bubble of every being. So humans, we have our own umwelt. We think we know everything, but we don't. Every umwelt is limited. And so we realize that connecting and trying to understand the horse is really sort of imagining what their umwelt is and what their sensory perception is and the limitations of that. So it's kind of trying to think like a horse. And some of the things that we believe are really important to them are socialization, stability, feed, but that's not the most important thing. Help me here.
Yeah, that's good.
And so we feel like it's a step towards having a real partnership, because ultimately when you're competing at a high level, trust is so important, going both directions. And that trust is based on a foundation of training and preparation and interaction between you and your horse. And so it helps to be thinking about their sensory bubble and what's going on with them.
Yeah. And so the word umwelt also, like, I think Ed Yong wrote a book about all these different animals, umwelts, and it's a fascinating book going into the, from the electric eels. I mean, they perceive their world through electric, and different insects see different wavelengths of light, and horses, don't see red, green too well, but they see blue, yellow. So that's like a basic thing of the umwelt, but the idea that you can kind of expand beyond that and just feel like, okay, well, let's just look at it from the horse's perspective, and what makes them feel secure and safe, and is comfortable for them.
It's like really checking in with the horse when you go there.
Yeah.
An incredibly compassionate approach to whatever you're doing and how you're caring for the horse. Shelley, you just mentioned a book and I missed it. Will you, the people, Ride IQ members love book recommendations.
I think it's called An Immense World. I can Google that, but it's by Ed Yong.
Okay.
And I read it a couple months ago. It's a relatively new book, but yeah, he talks a lot about umwelt in there.
Okay, great. That's helpful. And we'll check that's the title. So people
world.
Yeah,
it is An Immense World.
Wonderful.
Right.
So I've written that one down. I wrote the Essential Hoof book down. Book recommendations are always appreciated, and I'm sure that you guys are just have a plethora of them. So as somebody who I've only ever been exposed to traditional veterinary care for my horses and our horses, like speaking for me and Kinsey. So for people who have had that experience, but are really like what you're talking about is really resonating, and they have this desire to move in that direction in terms of their horse's care and also in terms of their education. What do you recommend as next steps for them to start like moving in that direction?
Well, the best, what you really need to do is find probably a practitioner who can help you. And there's a newly formed within the last few years college of in veterinary medicine for sports medicine and rehabilitation. So that would be one place to start. And then the other place, if you are looking for an acupuncturist, you can go to the websites of there's only two groups that teach veterinarians how to do acupuncture. And, look up for basically a certified veterinary acupuncturist is a CVA. So, I mean, I guess that would be where I would start. Or obviously there's a lot of books out there also that you can read. Dr. Hillary Clayton has done some amazing research over her whole life about biomechanics and sport horses. And she's published a lot of books, some of which might touch some of these issues. Some of her more recent ones touch on these issues. But yeah, I would say that probably finding a practitioner that is reputable would be the best way to go.
I feel like we're going to just have to take a tour of your guys' library, just understand all the different books you guys have read. It's so helpful. Oh my gosh, it keeps going. Oh my gosh.
It goes around the corner too.
Yeah.
It's very, it reminds me of like the Zoom background that's like, it's like an actual, well, it looks exactly like your bookshelf, but people use it as
It's
a
a
Zoom
big one,
background. Yeah. That's awesome. So, okay, you guys, not to totally shift us here, and we can always come back to this topic too, but on the topic of warm-up, Shelley, you and I had kind of gone back and forth on how much there is to talk about on this topic, and I think the questions are endless, but let's start kind of high level. We had talked about warming your horse up and preparing them both physically and mentally. Can we start with the physically side of that and kind of what that looks like in your guys' mind? What is a proper warm up for a horse physically?
Yeah. So I think the really important thing about warm up to remember is that you're talking about an actual temperature increase in the muscles. So that's a really important thing, I think, for people to understand. So it has to do with ambient temperature. So when it's hot out in the summer, you actually need less warm up than if you're in New York in the wintertime in an indoor, and it also has, it's going to proceed at a different pace in different horses. It's going to proceed at a different pace if the horse is stalled or is turned out most of the time. But I think that is something really to think about when you're talking about physical warm up. And then I think it's also really important to distinguish between, when we're talking about the mental and the physical, what you want to do physically with your horse and what you want to do mentally to prepare them. Because a lot of people think about warming up and they think about all sorts of different things. So if we're talking about the more broad area of just preparing your horse to ride, then the horses, from the physical point of view, you want to consider, in addition to the things I said before, your horse's own, let's say, issues. Like if for example, that your horse has had neck issues, there's certain physical therapy exercises you can do beforehand that will really help, or if they have back issues or, whatever. So sort of tailoring or individualizing a warm-up to your horse is also really important. And there's in-hand exercises you can do. There are physiotherapy exercises you can do that, like I said, if you find somebody to work with who can give you the specific physiotherapy exercises for your horse, that can be really important. There's the sort of classic lunging, which we don't do, but a lot of people do that. And there's certain reasons to do that. But I think one of the other, as I'm continue talking about this and that and the other, the important thing is to have a reason for what you're doing. So have a goal. Okay, well, my horse needs this X, so I'm going to do that, to address that. Or my horse is in this particular situation right now, and so I need to do that to address it.
So just to add to that a little bit, for me, it really depends on the horse, and it depends as an answer to a lot of horse questions. If I'm going to get on a horse that hasn't been sat on for a while and I want to warm it up to feel safe, I'll probably go into the round pen and work it at liberty a little bit and try to get some clean transitions, and then work her on a rope and get her listening to me and checking in. And if you see a canter that it looks like you'd be happy riding, then I'd go ahead and get on and ride. The horses that are in work that I'm sitting on singly probably 4 or 5 times a week, because in polo we take groups of horses out together to exercise them. It's called sets. But those I have a little warm up I do on the ground just before I start singling or playing a chucker, which is basically doing some leg yields, walking out to the field, doing little S-turn, like a little slalom course at a sitting trot, and then backing up with my eyes on a long target and dropping the reins after they've taken a couple soft backup steps. And then I feel like I'm ready to go on and do whatever I want to do with them that day.
It's very apparent that this is factoring in the mental preparation for the horse as much as the physical.
It's exactly right. It's so hard it's impossible to separate them, because physically warming up a horse properly can really put them in a good headspace, and doing the opposite puts them in a terrible headspace. And the converse works too. If you can, not when I'm talking about like actually warming up the muscles that they're cold or something like that, but as far as getting a horse mentally supple and soft often means their body is soft and supple also. They go hand in hand.
And I know, Adam, you said often when it comes to horses and horse sports, the answer is it depends. And it's true. And we hear it all the time on Ask an Expert. If it's possible, can you guys share some best practices for warm-ups? And the way that I think of it in my head is, if you thought of somebody, and it might even be you two, how you approach warm-ups, but if you thought of someone who you consider like this person really does right by their horse when it comes to warming up, what are the things that person is doing? So it doesn't necessarily need to be like, everyone needs to hack for 20 minutes before they ride, but just kind of like some general guidelines that will help listeners know that they are, at least doing their best or on the right track.
So I think that what Adam just said for a polo pony is a really good warm-up. So basically that's trotting, a little bit of geometry. I call it, geometry, like picking some shapes, and getting a soft feel, having them back, a rein back, or, is just a great core activation for horses. And then having them walk off on a long rein, of course, it kind of checks all the boxes too. So I think it has to be very discipline specific, and it also has to be individual specific. But for disciplines, one of the things that I think is really important to realize is that, so besides warming up, you need to activate muscles. And so that's like backing up, for example, activates the core muscles. Doing cavaletti work activates the core muscles. If you're gonna, we all know if you're not gonna go and jump a 3'6" oxer your first jump. We all know that you would jump a few smaller jumps and then you would build it up, right? Before you jump a bigger oxer. So, and that's just an example of activating the muscles. You're getting them firing before you ask
gradual
in a gradual manner,
sequential process.
As far as but to answer your question about different things, so I think that hacking on a buckle is a great warm up for a lot of horses. I really do. If the horse likes it, it does a lot of good. It will activate the big motor muscles. It doesn't activate so much the intrinsic muscles. But it will activate the ones that are, working for locomotion, in the legs, for example. Trotting is really good to activate. It has like tonic activity for the multifidus muscles in the back, which a lot of horses really suffer from weakness there. So I'm a big trot fan for that reason. And if you look at, good jumper, eventer, dressage riders, obviously they're warming their horse up, flatting them, what you call flatting, right? Just like a walk track canter. Usually it's a little bit of a long frame, letting those back muscles lengthen. And that's a really good warm up. Not all horse and rider combinations can achieve that, however. And so that's where basic things like walking on a long rein and trotting can really help. Then the other piece, which Adam mentioned earlier, is the groundwork. I think that groundwork can be a great way to learn because you can see it because you're not on top of the horse. And it's a great way for people to learn how the horse is carrying themselves and what their posture is and the biomechanics of their movement, and to sort of learn how to gauge that and like to figure out when they would be ready to be sat on. Obviously, like everything else, it's a skill. It takes time, but it's a really, really important skill, I think, to both develop the ability to play with your horse in that way, but also to be able to assess when they are warmed up, both mentally and physically, from the ground. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Adam, you had said that you would do like a serpentine pattern at the sitting trot. Can you talk a bit more about why you would do sitting trot versus posting? That's just my first time hearing that, so want to dive into that a bit more.
Yeah, that was something that came from Pat Pirelli. He came and stayed here a couple of years ago and was competing some 3-year-olds in
4-year-olds, I think,
cutting at the Augusta Futurity. And he would prefer in the warm-up that we sit the trot. And I'm not sure I understand his logic, but I like it with my horses. I feel like I'm more with them. It's a more subtle transition from walk to trot when you just sit instead of post. And the other thing that I like doing is using a fence and doing a shoelace shape with the figure 8. As you're coming towards the fence, you can move them over with your leg, and then you can either change speeds to depart with, if the fence is here, it could be a left lead departure this way, back to a trot, walk, move them over, right lead departure that way. So listening to what Shelley was saying, I realized that a lot of maybe a good warm-up is changing speed and direction smoothly. And perhaps the sitting trot is more like a walk than a fast trot where you're posting. So maybe it makes the transition smoother.
Yeah. So I have something to add to sort of, I think what Adam's feeling is that he can control the speed of the trot better. And it's kind of like I've seen it with him. It's like, it's just like a little bit of a jog trot, the horse, hopefully with the ears a little kind of going, rather than be like, okay, we're trotting and like you know.
Exactly.
So I think that's where it comes from. I know there's a lot of classical dressage trainers who tell you don't ever sit the trot until they've cantered, but I think that's a different kind of sitting the trot. So this is more like a Western
Cowboy trot.
little jog. Yeah. And obviously with a good rider, it doesn't really matter whether you're sitting or posting, you're not going to hurt their back. I think.
I can picture it, and it sounds like, as I'm picturing what you're describing, it sounds like such a natural progression of that warm up and getting your horse and yourself in tune with one another gradually.
Exactly. I mean, I'm looking for a relaxed horse and a supple horse. Shelley used the word supple, but for me, that would be the goal of the warm up. And then you can progress to more difficult tasks and assignments, or playing a fast chucker after
Right. And
warmed up.
this is also like, keep in mind, like we're talking about highly bred, thoroughbred mares that are generally pretty spicy and hot. So your warm up, you're doing everything you possibly can to keep everything really quiet, you know, as opposed to horses. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like all tailored to the individual horse, right?
It depends.
It depends. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the flickering ears, though, because that sounds like a nice signal to you during a warm up that you are in tune with one another.
Yeah. So there's two things. There's definitely like the listening ear, which is something that's really important. Like just having that horse every now and then, whether you're doing groundwork with them or whether you're on their back. I mean, you just want them to be like, oh, yep. Like I register, you know, but the lop ear I'm talking about is when they're really relaxed and their ears just kind of lop out to the sides. And so then they're trotting along. It's just like, oh, I love that. That's just the best.
It's so
and
nice.
The other thing they do, another sign is if you have a nice soft backup and you drop the reins on their neck, you'll hear them exhale.
Yeah, an audible sigh is always good.
We have, so on Ride IQ are audio lessons that the coach is recording while they're on their horse. And we hear so often as members are riding along to that lesson, they're like, my horse blows out the moment that the coach's horse blows out and like gives that relaxation sign. And I find that really interesting. But all of this is also the result of an all-encompassing like environment of trust that you have with your horse. Like those floppy, relaxed ears don't just happen because you're doing the right pattern in a warm up, but that's something that that is a partnership that you've earned. I also didn't know that polo horses are primarily mares. I heard you say she earlier, but are they all mares or are they just mostly mares?
They're just, most of the top horses are mares. Like when Adam, when it was in his prime, he hardly ever had a gelding in his barn. Now we have a few more because we started breeding, and when you start breeding, you get 50 and 50. But and there are good geldings, certainly, but basically the polo is very the horses are very competitive on the field. They're trying to win the race. They're trying to, it's a physical game where you have to bump horses like off the line. And so most top players feel like the mares just have more of the competitive spirit. And so and that's not be true at the amateur level, but at the top levels, it's dominated by mares.
How cool. I love that.
Yeah. Geldings, we geld geldings to be tractable, and you don't necessarily want tractability in a polo pony, in a top polo pony. Yeah.
So Adam described a typical warm up for him. I know, Adam, it varies horse to horse and depending also on like that horse's recent work and schedule. Shelley, not to be redundant, but what would like the equivalent be for you as an amateur event rider? What are you doing when you get on one of your event horses? Or before you get on?
I do all of the above. And maybe I don't like to be bored, but I will hack, definitely. Like if I go for a 15-minute hack on a long rein, I feel like I can just get right to work, especially like in this time of year when it's warm out. I will do a walk track canter on a uber striking, hopefully, like, a little bit of a long stretch. I will do groundwork, either at liberty or on a rope, where I would generally be looking for exactly the same things Adam was talking about. It's basically soft transitions is what I'm usually looking for when, especially the horses at liberty. I want to see that I can give very minimal pressure or release of pressure, and they respond to it by either moving forward or slowing down and turning into me, and they have the ear cocked and those things, and it's like something that you look and you say, oh yeah, I want to ride that. Sometimes I will do manual therapy on a horse before I get on, like, especially if I think that they might have been a little sore from something that happened recently, and I kind of treat that as a warm up. So yeah, I kind of do all of those things, but then I definitely also follow the standard where when you're riding, you kind of peak to gradually increase the level of pressure, and then you have a plateau where you're working hardest, but that shouldn't be at the very end of the ride. And then you might do a little bit more that's a little bit less hard when the horse is a little bit more tired, and then cool down.
At what stage in your ride, or I guess in your warm-up, are you taking a contact?
For me,
yeah,
like I said, it can be totally different. I also sometimes warm up at the walk in full contact, like for like a dressage ride, I'll do, basically leg yield, shoulder in, haunches in, half pass, turn on the forehand, turn on the hindquarters, and go together and do those both sides. And like be on, not like high frame contact, but be on contact. It really depends on the horse. It also depends on what I'm feeling, honestly, that day. Which is another thing to consider. And this whole thing I was thinking about, what people need to warm up too. And especially if you're going to go out and do something that's a little bit physically challenging, don't forget about warming up yourself. And so, because it's a partnership. And so sometimes if I'm tired, it might be my third horse or something, I might do something different than I did on the first horse that day. And then also if it's the first horse and it's like 8:00 in the morning and it's the middle of winter. So for us, that might be like 40 degrees and it's cold for me. I'm going to do I have to warm up too. Right. So that might be a good day to trot, because then I'm going to warm up. I'm not going to go for a walk hack. So sorry. It so depends. Yeah. There's lots of different things.
Don't apologize. There's so much.
It's also my mood. It's not only like sometimes I know I don't have the patience for certain things. Mm-hmm. And then you have to acknowledge that, okay, today I don't have the patience to go and do, 20 minutes of trying to get this horse to do X. And when I know I can just do Y, and we'll just get on with it.
And we bike to the barn.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Biking to the barn is a good warm up.
That's really cool. Is your barn, it's on your property, right?
Yeah, but we do have like 300 plus acres. So it's like a 5-minute or less bike ride, but it's uphill. So
it's not that far, but it
just kind of gets you going.
Gets your heart rate up a little bit.
It's like an HIIT.
Yeah, totally.
High intensity interval workout, whatever.
It's really nice. And one of the biggest takeaways for me so far is just the importance of observing the horse you're on. And like you're talking about, Shelley, observing yourself and doing what's right based on those two things. But it's nice to hear there's not a one size fits all, that it's important to be thoughtful about these things, but also like it's okay to like sit the trot earlier, pick up a light contact. Like you're reading the situation and doing what's right based on what you know.
What?
Exactly. I think reading the situation is really important, and having a reason for your choice that you make, and being able, if someone asked you like, well, why are you doing this that way? And you'd be like, well, because I'm really tired, or whatever reason, or my horse is bored today. Like, I don't think he wants to do that today. Like, normally I do this, but today he's just like telling me that, I don't know, he's bored of that. So we're going to try something else, Yeah.
And there's many different ways to get to the preferred end. And in our book, we're saying it's not so much our way as the philosophy of how to look at things and how to have ideas for why you're doing things a certain way.
Yeah. Give people the tools to start having the thoughts for themselves.
Exactly. And know what questions to ask, and know, and be like, okay, well, wait a minute, that didn't work out so well. So maybe, try something different, based on some knowledge and skill set that you have.
Right. And as amateurs, there's so much to start understanding. I mean, you'll never get to the point where you're like, I get it. I mean, even as professionals, just
not even professionals
too, just let me tell you. Yeah, it's never ending.
We all feel it.
Yeah.
But it is so special to be on this path of learning for the purpose of, being the best partner and caretaker you can be for your horse, and like as a means of personal growth for yourself. Are there any things that do that? I mean, I don't want to have a blacklist or like do make you cringe or anything like that, but like that's what I'm trying to get at around warming a horse up that are either common or just things that you would be like, that's something to avoid when it comes to warming a horse up.
I don't like lunging personally. I feel like lunging induces mindlessness. And I don't think there's anything about our relationship with a horse that should be not intentional and somewhat of a relationship. So that's my one, I guess. Obviously, any form of like forcing a horse to do something also, especially in a warm-up situation, is completely probably wrong in my book.
I don't like seeing people pulling on a horse's mouth to get them to back up. And unfortunately, sometimes I see that before polo games or practices. Yeah, I think our philosophy is to work with the horse, be a partner, be smooth, have feel. I think it was Ray Hunt who said it's a feel following a feel. And try to keep that in mind, especially through the warm-up. And then maybe when you're competing, you can let go, but you have this foundation of mutual trust between you and your horse.
Absolutely. And one of our members in chat, she said that her dressage coach likes her to add like turn on the haunches and turn on the forehand, as she's learned that when a horse crosses their own body, it helps them relax as well as warm up. Is that your guys' understanding as well?
Absolutely correct. Yes. Really, and that is, when we do groundwork, natural horsemanship, whatever, I mean, basically getting the horse to break over and to separate the forehand and the rear is the basis of a lot of what is done. And it's very correct.
That's what
and you can do it in all sorts of different ways. Like, there's sort of the more cowboy way, there's doing it on the ground, there's more the traditional dressage way. Any of those ways is very helpful. What are you saying?
A cowboy friend of ours who's probably in his early 80s now used to always like to step the horse over behind before he got on it. And it was like, this helps me not get bucked off. But that's why, because it relaxes the horse.
Wow. That's amazing. Especially with, based on that story, I think some people might give it a try. Okay, we are coming up to the end of this conversation, which is so sad to me. I've been watching the clock and I've been sad as it counts down. you two are incredible. You're incredible individuals. And I am so enjoying having this conversation with both of you, and like seeing your relationship too is very special. So before we get to this last question, I just want to thank you again for taking the time. It is such a treat, and I really did enjoy every second of it. I'm excited for the book to come out too. You have, I mean, I'm certain that there are 2 people here who are going to buy it, but like I said, like people who are part of Ride IQ are such book lovers. So I'm sure they'll be really excited about that as well. Yeah. I'll ask a final question, and Kinsey, if you have one, you can ask that too. Is there anything that comes to mind for either of you or both of you when it comes to the why behind the work you do or choosing a life with horses? Like kind of what motivates you?
I think it's really deep atavism. I don't know. I think that people who love horses, it's just such a deep emotion and deep feeling, and there's just a really strong sense that they bring out the best in you. I think that's what kind of keeps me going, is that I feel like I mean, as a veterinarian, I can help these amazing creatures and hopefully reduce some pain and suffering. And, but they teach me so much, and they enrich my life so much.
Yeah. So, I think that having a sport, I told you already that I was a sport crazy little boy, and having a sport that you're combining with another species is like having it all. And now it's not always that I'm competing at a high level, but just getting up every morning to ride a group of horses, to exercise them, to trim them, even just to feed them, is an enriching, rewarding experience. And I feel like we have responsibility for them, and they give us their trust and confidence in return.
That's beautiful answers. And I am certain, I've been certain for the past 57 minutes that if I were a horse, I would like to be one of your guys' horses. They are lucky to be in your care. Well, thank you again, you guys. This is amazing. Okay. And thank you to everyone who attended. And if you're listening after the fact, we're glad that you're tuning in that way as well. With that, Shelley and Adam have